This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
When I say making it simple, it's not making it simple, but it's actually choosing better product and then not fussing around with it so much, and then just letting it sing and speak for itself. I'll never stop telling my senior teams that as well. Less is more. If it doesn't need to be there, it comes off.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Pubs have changed a lot since the days of the 6 o'clock swill. The notion of gastropub has been tossed around in the last decade or two, but the evolution of pub grub has been extraordinary down under. These days, the food offering in pubs rivals that of the best restaurants. But how do you strike a balance between great food and a great pub? Dave Clarke is the culinary director of the Sydney Collective Group. Dave, how are you?
I'm very well, Huck. Mate, it's great to be here. Thanks very much.
It's good to have you on the show. You've got quite a busy job and a huge role with the Sydney Collective Group. How many venues are you looking after?
So looking after 12 venues currently. I mean, I started 5.5 years ago, and we had 6 venues and one not trading food. So I guess we've had a little bit of expansion over the past few years with some pretty large, iconic, beautiful venues.
What is the difference between some of the venues? You've got quite a few, but are they quite different?
Yep, they're all different, which is, I guess that's the challenge, having up to 12 venues and then probably 15 brands within those venues. You know, we've got everything from a beautiful modern Australian pub to a vegetarian focus to a rock and roll Japanese bar, you know, to a more of a Southern Cal beautiful fish shop up more in the Northern Rivers district. So it's quite interesting array of venues that we've got.
As culinary director, how do you create such different offerings and can maintain that sort of high level that the group set?
I think it's definitely making sure that we understand what the brand is. You know, I think once you deviate away from the brand, and then it just gets a bit lost, you know, it's making sure that, you know, like we've always been, you should be able to put the food on the table from starters all the way to dessert, and it doesn't look out of place. It all works in harmony and everything just flows. And I think that's just the big secret of success around making sure that the brands are really in line with what they are and what we agree they are, and then what the consumers know they are, you know. So
you've had a fascinating career working in big groups and big restaurants as well, which I want to explore. What was food like for you, though, when you were young?
When I was young, I guess Hunter Valley growing up, there wasn't, I guess, a lot of choice, but I guess I'd have to say that I go back to my dad's ethos. He never believed in takeaway. He never got takeaway, which was a bit of a punish for me, but I think it's where I started my journey with that. I mean, I wouldn't know about Macca's unless I got a driver's license, and then I drove past it. So I think growing up, where I think the ethos was, if you can do it better yourself, do it at home. And then when you go to restaurants, you're really looking for quality and experience, you know. And I grew up with that, and I've got 2 young daughters now that have grown up in a hospo family now as well. And you know, it's a fight for oysters, Huck, with 14 and 12-year-old girls. It's strange looks you get when you're at Yumcha and the kids are ordering honeycomb tripe and, you know, slow cooked tendons. You know, you definitely feel the hospo in the vein quite quickly when you start growing up and immersed amongst it.
What lured you to a career in hospitality? Do you remember those sort of first couple of years in a commercial kitchen?
Well, I remember the first couple of years, but I think, I remember from when my sister and I used to line up in the kitchen when Dad was doing a roast to make sure that the skin ratio was fair on all plates, I think coming through high school and getting a catering gig, I lasted a day on the floor as a waiter. Quickly ended up into the dish pit, into getting trained on how to cook, and then to how to portion food and just get into it all. And I think that like a lot of chefs out there, I guess, very creative, attention a span of a goldfish basically, but what you can do with your hands and the pleasure and the attention to detail and that next bit, like there's a creative bit. There's this sense of wanting to be able to absolutely execute something and being so proud of it. I think getting that as a young chef and really going through it is a big part of where my journey started.
Well, take us back to when you were young. What were the really integral sort of moments and venues that you worked in as you were building your career?
Well, I think when I first started, like straight out of doing my HSC, like I worked for a chef called Barry Micklejohn, who was a friend of the family. There wasn't any... let's say I wasn't favorited. The first moment I walked in there, it was, don't put your jumper there. What do you think and get in there? So it was not a free kick at all. But I think that going through and then learning from the ground up, and I guess I had a taste for it. I mean, I wasn't sure after the first week, but I guess when you're really determined, and then I guess failure is not an option, and then all you want to do is succeed and to give it a hard crack. I think that if you want to do anything, you'll do it and you'll do it well, but it takes dedication and that takes a lot of commitment to actually be able to do that.
The first part of your career was in Pecolbin and Newcastle, but you made the move to Sydney. What was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was amazing, Huck. I mean, I remember I think it was a second or third year apprentice where I conned some of my mates into driving down to Sydney one night. We ended up driving all the way. We ended up into Rockpool. I mean, it didn't have a booking in there. And this was like, what was this? This is 98, 99. Went in there with, a couple 19-year-old kids. My first experience of Sydney really was that when I sat down and I had his tortellini with prawns, I had his crab omelette, and then I finished with a date tart. I remember coming back and going to my dad just like, Jesus Christ, like I never thought it could be like that. I think when I look back at the Hunter back then, doing a rare quail breast or being innovative and then having a lot of fun with the food, it wasn't quite there. So I wanted to really, really get ingrained into it all and take the next step. And to be honest, I wanted to move to Sydney for 2 years, and that was 19 years ago, and I'm still at it. So definitely changed my life.
Well, you spent a lot of time at Quay restaurants. Do you have any stories of what it was like in that kitchen?
Oh, look, when I started in Quay, it was an a la carte restaurant. It was obviously three hats. It was the top of it all. And I guess I came to Sydney and I had a choice of working with Damien Pignolet, who's one of my heroes over in Bistro Moncur, or leading in with Pete Gilmore. I made the decision to work with Pete. And I think that kitchen then, it changed a few different ways, but still it was the integrity of produce. It was the textures and harmony and balance. I think just a couple of days in there, and I guess, when you look at rosters back in the day and then they actually had on or off on them, there was no time frames on them. So you're in there at 8, you're making sure that you're all boxed off. There'll be beers in the afternoon, and then you come back and then you do the service. But I think, back then you'd definitely have to prove yourself, and there was a trial period that your mates would put you through to make sure they were happy with you. So it was a big, I guess, induction and making sure that if you don't fit in with a crew, then it doesn't work. But the food was like the quality of produce and just Pete's approach. It was absolutely mind blowing to me about how it was all treated. I started in there as a CDP. After a year, I was a junior sous, and I think about a year after that, I was his 2IC, and I was there for 5.5 years. And it was like I don't think I've heard anyone say anything ill about Pete, and they've got no right to, because it's absolutely an institution. He's the nicest guy I think I've ever met. He's a top bloke.
Well, Peter Gilmore's influence on our culinary landscape is incredible. What's he actually like to work for? Do you have any stories of the interactions that you had?
Look, I think with Pete, Like, I think he's always thinking and hunting and looking, and he's always like, he's never thinking, what am I doing on the weekend, right? You know, Huck, it'd be times when you're looking like in the middle of service and you see Pete just staring down the line, waiting to serve another order, and he's just got that concentration and that, you know, the fingers on his chin, and he's thinking, and he's humming to himself almost, and we just knew there was something that was going to come out of this that obviously we needed to get into and to help execute and get it away. But it was some of the most exciting times, I think, that I've ever had in my culinary career, though. You know, it was just absolutely mind-blowing.
You left Quay Restaurant and took on a major role with the Chop House, a very different style of restaurant. What sort of impact did that have on you, that change?
Well, I think through my time, like spending 5 and a bit years with Pete, like that's very much a special occasion and the top of the tree as far as food goes, and that's still the same for me. What I really wanted to get into was more of an everyday format and to really hone my skills around what does that mean and how do you execute that and how do you attract customers regularly? How do you look after the CBD district and still hit all the marks with, you know, with value for money and choice and, you know, what they really go for. So, I mean, the Chop House was a project that I started with Kingsley back in the day as well. We wanted to bring a New York-style steakhouse into the Australian market by focusing on modern Australian produce, you know, modern Australian food, modern Australian produce, but then the integrity of the way that we cook the meats. I think we had one of the first Montague broilers coming in. Did a lot of work around the meats and the proteins and getting things cut certain ways. And, you know, the salad section there we had was all about the chopped salads and bringing that to life. And then to bring all those flavors that are coming back over from New York, but then really make it into the Australian market was a lot of fun.
Your time at Chop House was also about really connecting with producers and championing what they do. Do you have any stories of the connections that you made?
The connections in there, like we really went out, and I guess coming out of Quay, I probably wasn't ready to, like, I was always wanting to hunt for the best of the best, you know. If we're getting things made, like we're using herb and spice and getting things shipped up, buying oysters direct from Broadwater Oysters, then they're actually posting them back up to us. Working especially with the lamb and the beef and the Wagyu, and, you know, if it's between buying pallets and getting them aged a certain way. I was getting our beef fillets dry aged for 2 weeks, and then they were getting trimmed and brought in, so then we can do a carpaccio that was, you know, equal to what I thought was Harry's famous carpaccio, you know. And then it was just a lot of fun. Even the seafoods, and like, it needed to be fresh, it needed to be the best I can get my hands onto, but also it needed to be priced so the value for money, the perception of value were it's just a no-brainer, you know.
One of the fascinating parts about your career was the link with Jamie Oliver and Jamie's Italian in Australia. Take us into that group and what it was like being part of the momentum of that.
So I didn't know what I was in for when I took that role on. I think I hummed and hawed about it for a while. You know, I was thinking, oh yeah, like, you know, they're not going to want a non-Italian guy to head this off and whatever else. It was pretty daunting. I just played it down. Of course, you know, Jamie's a top bloke. Like, he's so down to earth and he's just a really nice guy. But his team were looking to relaunch into Australia. They got told about the Chop House, and I think the ethos and the way that the care and attention to our producers, to our product, all over, it was a really strong piece. So he sent, I'll call them some of his spies, but he had a few of his guys come over and have a look, and unbeknownst to me, basically just trialing and seeing how the fit worked, and they were pretty impressed and wanted to move forward. And I guess jumping into that, we opened up the Sydney venue, probably did about 3.5 months and on product and, you know, where it's all from, and additives and preservatives and colorings, and everything was free range. And I think I had the first nitrate-free salami done in Sydney, which was pretty big back then to get that approved, you know. And that was I needed a lot of help and a lot of influence to get that done. But now it's on trend now, you know. Now people see the nutritional benefits with that, you know, which is pretty cool. But then when you're looking at the fisheries, you're looking at free range eggs, and like I had to research and study all this stuff, and I was horrified when I actually saw what's actually out there in the big bad world when you look at it, right? So it was an interesting time. I mean, rolling into an open, I think with Sydney, it was, no one's going to line up. I've still got that arrogance in my head. No one's going to line up. It's just going to be a restaurant. It's all good, And I think there was about a 500-metre line for the first month we opened that joint up. It's crazy. Making pasta in the front window. I still say pasta when it's supposed to be pasta, right? But it just got burned into me. You have an extruder out there, and they're making one of the 10 varietals of pasta that we've got, and they're running it through the crowd and into the kitchen, and we're just basically chucking it straight into salted water and finishing off. It was just an amazing experience. But then you've got 35 young cooks, or even just people with no experience. So the training platforms was A1. The food was simple, relaxed. It was home-style cooking, but the value for money, I think it was like $12 for a small bolognese and like 16 or 17 for a large. I've got brat pans in there, and I'll be making 140 kilos of our 3 different sauces that we used for that. So it was just big numbers, but it was all free range, and it was all quality product, and San Manzano tomatoes and free range this and line caught that. So I think that's where I really, really learned a lot about the respect for produce, and also price points. You don't need to rip people off. A busy restaurant, yes, you need to make money, but bums on seats is what we're talking about, right? So when you start looking at the mechanics behind that, it's really interesting. But it's a lot of work. 1,000 covers a day in a 160-seat restaurant, for months on end. You go through a fair bit of product, Huck.
What were the challenges involved? It was incredibly popular when it, as you mentioned, when it landed. What were the challenges in just orchestrating that?
I think the challenges was I had to learn, I guess, the organizational structure and supporting people, like working in smaller businesses, fine dining businesses, and especially back then, how you could treat people and how you could just speak to people. I guess the biggest thing I learned is just you got to humble yourself. You need to put yourself in their shoes. If you're not willing to do it yourself and then lead by example and, work beside someone, there's no point just pointing finger and yelling at someone. That's old school. If you're going to correct someone, then go around and show them how to do it, but make sure when they do it right, you bloody make a big shout and fuss about how bloody good that was, with that, it's all confidence, without confidence, the chef's I don't want to be here. With confidence, and I got you, and we'll get through this, and let's do that, and that's amazing. It's all of a sudden, it's shit, I can do this. I can do these numbers, and I've still got chefs that I catch up with from back through that era that's just I'd never experienced that in my life, and it wasn't how busy it was. It was the mateship and just getting through the battle every day and nailing it and being proud of it. It was a pretty special time.
You mentioned that Jamie Oliver is a great bloke. What was it like when you first met him, and what was it like working with him?
So I guess first time I met him, we got flown over to the UK in his studios, and I remember he was in a glass office, and he was having a meeting about doing a charity for kids and that sort of stuff, and it was dragging on, and we're sitting on the couch outside and nervous as hell, sweating beads, just got off a flight, shipped straight in there, and then, look, seeing his piercing blue eyes staring at you when he's in the end of his meeting, waiting for the next ones to come in, he has a real soft spot, he calls them Aussies, but for Australia. It's it means a lot to him. I think going through his career, Australia was one of the biggest supporters early on of the work that he was doing. So he really, really cared about making sure that he wanted representation in Australia that really just believed in him and his brand, and to cook it like it was cooked in the UK, So, yeah, meeting with him, and I remember shaking his hand, and he used to call his hands butcher's hands. He's got the biggest hands I think that I've shaken of another bloke. It's big. It surrounds your hand, and I think that we went through the whole this and that, and it's great to meet you, all that sort of stuff. And then he checked. I remember checking with his assistant, and then he wanted to know what he was doing tonight. And then she pulled out this diary that was for the next 3 years he was booked out. It was a big book. And then when he looked at it, he goes, "Nah, I want to cancel tonight. I want to take the Aussies out for dinner." So we end up going to the River Calf that night. And the River Calf, obviously, institution. We had a table. I think there were 6 of us. It was on a round table of 4 top. So we all squished in there. And he just said, we'll start from one of everything and just one at a time, and we'll share around and we'll just have a chat and we'll just go through that and whatever else. So I was squished up pretty close, right beside him, sharing a fork with Jamie. Back then it was like, oh my God, like he's a pretty cool dude and down to earth. And, then he drove us home and cruising around, and it was just an experience. Just a really, really nice guy. But he was so interested in the producers, and then what are we looking at, and who do you trust, and who can do this? And, I'm saying I've got the nitrate-free slum, and he's like, oh my God, that's absolutely outstanding. And then getting buffalo bocconcinis made, and then it's just like we did have to bend over a bit. I think they didn't quite grasp that we do have to travel our product a bit further to get it over here. But I really wanted to showcase our olive oil, our cheeses as much as possible, and he just fell in love with our product,
These days, as we mentioned at the top of the show, you're the culinary director of the Sydney Collective. How different is this role compared to everything else you've done in your career?
I think going through, and then I think being an ambassador for a brand, running a single venue, you can really get your head into that and then really knock it out of the park. But I think once you start talking multiple businesses with multiple personalities, with multiple brands, really, really looking at the strength of the teams, we're really focusing on behaviours at the moment. Leading into our values, and it's so interesting to see like the positive outlook that we've got, and then how that can touch everyone, and then basically making my dream is for everyone that works with the Sydney Collective to run the business like they're running their own business. That's when you know that you're there, and that's what. That's what we're trying to really instill in everyone. Going, we want you to run these businesses like you own it. We want you to have that. We've got a long way to go with the Sydney Collective, and there's so many opportunities. We can't do it without the quality of staff, but then we can't do it as a management team unless we're living and exhibiting those behaviours and leading by example.
The company has doubled in size since you've come on board, from 6 venues to 12. Where do you start when you're creating an idea for once you have the location?
I think it's a group effort. Just look. I think the area, the brand that we're looking at. If it's in a CBD, it's probably a bit easier. But I think you don't want to go off the reservation. You need to make sure that you can execute it. You need to make sure that I guess the food styling's relaxed enough. You're not touching the food too much. It's generally making sure that less is more, but then the quality of the flavour, and then, we've got venues like if you go coastal and you go, right, coastal, beautiful. If you go ceviches or you go lime, you go chili, you got this, or you got barbecued meats, you got this. You can really get a sense of what would work in that area. I think we pride ourselves on not looking at local competition. What we want is we want world class. We want world class to be the world class hospitality group, but we're not looking local for our competitors to see who we're benchmarking against. We've got Sarge, he's just really leading us and just going world class means what's the best venue in the world that's doing that, and that's who we're benchmarking ourselves against.
The group has a string of amazing pubs. What does it take to create a great gastropub?
Gastropub consistency, number 1. Value for money, number 2. Quality of product needs to be up there as well. It's making sure that you're not overreaching what I guess you're trying to achieve. We've got some venues that are more rural based, and that relies heavily more on the classics and making sure you're not being too adventurous, but then you need to nail that out, and the portion sizes need to be right, and that just needs to be absolutely singing. Well, then you get more of your upmarket pubs, and then that turns more into a relaxed dining venue that's more it's got a restaurant feel to it. And I think with that as well, less is more. Quality of product, making sure that you've got I think the right DNA, like modern Australian pubs have got a long list of pub classics and pub favourites, which that's cool. But you also need to make sure that it all works together. You know, you need to make sure that there's nothing that stands out that shouldn't be there. I think that's a big trick right there.
Is there a venue that you've opened in the last couple of years that you can tell us about and created that really speaks of that sort of benchmark that you're setting?
So I guess the interesting one I've got, it's the Imperial Hotel in Erskineville. That didn't have a food brand in it when we first started. Obviously, it's a 2-story, beautiful pub. We're in the south of Quay, and then we're going through, I guess I was having a look at a lot of the vegan restaurants and gluten-free restaurants just to see what was actually going on. But when I went through these, I had a look, and then everyone was smiling and happy and putting away margaritas, and then the food, like I think the acid levels and the textures and the flavours, I mean, you wouldn't think that, you know, jackfruit and that sort of gear would taste any good, right? But with the right ratios and then with the right finesse and how all that goes, it just turns into an experience. But it's not until you eat it where you're not heavy and bloated like you've had protein and dairy and all these bits and pieces, right? It feels really light, and then you actually feel like you've had some substance too, like some good gear going down here. So when we look back, I guess in the Erskineville market there, I really wanted to go vegan, gluten-free, but it's probably a bit before its time. So we settled on more of a brand where we've got a vegetable and vegetarian-focused, plant-focused menu, but then the side additions ended up being, I had solid fuel ovens and grills in this place. So then the side show really was the proteins and the fish. And then what we found is, like, all the dishes on the actual menu, you can actually interchange and that all works. But then if you go a grilled hanger steak or a wood oven roasted a snapper or you know South Australian beautiful calamari, if you're putting that through and serving that really simply, what we found is, like, you're actually creating your own adventure by ordering these dishes and then getting some proteins, and then everyone was just sharing and mingling and getting amongst it. So it was a very, very interesting, and, like, it's a very tasty product as well. You know, it's a fun way to eat.
The last couple of years have been pretty challenging for everyone in hospitality, and pubs were hit pretty heavily as well. What sort of impact did it have to the operations of what you do?
Oh, like, you could say a lot would be an understatement. I mean, I guess if we say that the start of that year we hit COVID, right? The start of that year we've got bushfires out of control. Then we end up, I think we were having floods, and then we had COVID. So then in COVID, then a lot of staff ended up going back. A lot of my key staff ended up going back overseas because they had to go back to the family. It was very, very unknown to what was going down. So then they shut the borders. You know, we opened back up again. We closed back down again. Trying to find hospo staff is just near impossible. Like, people coming back, their emotions are on edge. They don't know what's going on. It's a very difficult time. You know, and then, like, just recently, like, trying to get through with the staff that we've got, and then, you know, we're limiting the numbers that we can do purely because we just haven't got the staff to do that. We haven't got the wait staff to execute what we're doing, so we're throttling it down. But on top of the lack of staff, we've got protein prices that went up 30%. You know, we've got seafood and, like, prawns and scale fish, you know, is up 10, 15, 20%. You know, just the cost of diesel for suppliers. Our veg going through December has been underwater for the start of December, which, you know, that's just had an impact. We've got no one to plant. We've got obviously with the restrictions on the travellers, we haven't got working holiday visas. So the poor farmers haven't got people to help plant, harvest and produce their vegetables. So now we haven't got the luxury of having the produce that we need to get through it all. So I mean, it's just like an absolute, like, I think everyone that's able to stay open now are just looking back going, well, it can't get any worse, can it? And if you see someone that doesn't touch a piece of wood when they say that, tell them touch some wood bloody quickly, you know, because it's just, we've been through the works, and everyone in hospitality needs some support. I just heard the other day, right, now the visa's coming over. Yes, we can get people coming over to work in Australia, which is fantastic. But a 482 visa just got announced. It takes 7 months to process. I mean, how's that fair when we haven't got staff to work? And that's up on the government. Like, I'm just like, we just need some assistance by fast-tracking some amazing visa staff from overseas to help the hospitality market in Australia. And I don't understand why they're making it so hard to do that, Huck. It's just stupidity. You
mentioned at the top of the show that, you know, as a group, you're just sort of getting started, and there is a lot of optimism and potential as we're sort of moving away from the last 2 years with the challenges as well. But what can we expect in the next sort of year or so from the group?
Well, the Sydney Collective, like, we're looking to expand, but we want to make sure that we're able to execute it. But I mean, for businesses, for some new businesses coming on, that's going to be, you know, I would say not so much around the Sydney market because that's pretty saturated. I mean, we're looking at within the Northern Rivers, we've got 4 venues up there now, which are absolutely looking amazing. So, I mean, if we're looking a bit north of that, or, you know, we're looking out a bit west, I think we've got some very large iconic venues. I mean, I'd like to see, I guess, a few more of the smaller size venues that we can really hone and chip in. You know, like we're opening up in Circular Quay in March in a beautiful French restaurant that's, you know, 260 seats outside on the water, looking at the bridge and the harbour bridge. You know, like those sort of projects there are absolutely breathtaking. And then I think there's a lot of opportunities with these beautiful venues, you know, like, and I think the quality that we're aiming to execute at, and the service standards that we're aiming to execute at, I think that's just going to naturally lift the collective where we want it to be.
You've had some incredible roles and looking after so many venues now that are so different. What is it that you love about what you do?
If I think the challenge of it all, but you know what, I think creating high-performance teams is something that's been drilled into me over and over again. Like the actual connection that you have with your management teams, and then the feedback, and like the quality of the product, and just it's just without that, I think without those teams and with that the full understanding of where we're going and who we are, you know, and this is how we're going to get there. I mean, if you can't have an honest conversation, you know, it doesn't work. So I think that's pretty important. Without our senior teams, then we wouldn't be able to grow to the way we're growing.
It's been a pretty rough couple of years, but what are the positives to come out of it for you?
The positives to come out, I think that the way we look at food is definitely a food and service. You know, I think it's definitely a bit of a focus point. Look, I've been looking now, like with a lack of staff, there's a lot of simplifications that we need to make. You know, there's a lot. I think it's just getting back to the core product. When I say making it simple, it's not making it simple, but it's actually choosing better product and then not fussing around with it so much, and then just letting it sing and speak for itself. You know, there's so much in that I think that I'll never stop telling my senior teams that as well. Less is more. If it doesn't need to be there, it comes off. But how good's that oil? How good's that vinegar? How good's that steak? Are you using the right salt? You know, and is your char grill okay? Or do we need to get a different apparatus dragged in here so then we can actually execute it at the top standard, you know?
Dave, what you're doing there is absolutely incredible, and look forward to seeing what you bring to the table in the next couple of years. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear just a little bit of your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Cheers, Huck. Thanks a lot, mate.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.